Piracy. It's as old as the sea itself. But the pirate legacy has been hijacked by Hollywood and romantic fiction. Pirates, we're told, are faintly noble, selfless independents, toiling for king and country. The real pirate story is much darker. Pirate lives were nasty, brutish, and short. Lives that for a brief moment in history terrorized the oceans, demanded the attention of the naval might of Europe, and then sank out of sight. Wherever there have been sea traders, there have been sea thieves. Controlling the sea meant controlling the world. But pirates were the worm in the apple of sea power. Even in the ancient world, coastal raiders constantly violated Greek and Roman ships. And wherever there were trade routes, pirates have always appeared to pick off weak and solitary ships on the vast and indefensible seas. By the 16th century, empires had become global, and it was a field day for the sea wolves. Piracy was approaching its high water mark. And it was then that one of the most celebrated of all pirates first went a-roving. He called himself Blackbeard.
His beard was black, which he suffered to grow of an extravagant length. In time of action, he struck lighted matches under his hat, which, appearing on each side of his face, made him altogether such a figure that imagination cannot form an idea of fury from hell to look more frightful.
His real name is Edward Teach, though he also goes by such aliases as Tack, Thatch, Tash, and for some reason, Drummond. But even during his lifetime, all you needed to know was Blackbeard. He is psychopathically addicted to violence, and he's as ferocious as his image, which features 6 loaded pistols, a cutlass, and a musket. More sinister still, Blackbeard is savagely unpredictable. It's how he rules, keeping everyone else on edge. Even a friendly card game is shaking hands with the devil. You never knew when Teach would go off, like he did when his first mate Israel Hands called his bluff.
In a bad game you play hands?
Born in Bristol, England about 1680, Blackbeard explodes into history in 1716 off the Carolinas and Virginia. He has his way with merchant shipping of all nations. In time, he is both the governor and the Chief Justice of Carolina in his pocket. In command of a flotilla of small ships and as many as 700 men, he captures a massive French frigate, and he rechristens her as Queen Anne's Revenge. She carries 40 guns and a crew of 300. At the peak of his power, he blockades the port of Charleston, South Carolina. Holding for ransom a local magistrate and his child, he keeps the town on its knees for 4 days. The outrage is too much. The governor of Virginia puts a price upon his head. By November 22nd, 1718, Teach is history. Though it takes 5 musket balls and 20 cutlass slashes, the last of which severs his head from his shoulders. And so, Blackbeard moves into legend. Himself spectacularly dead, 13 of his crewmen hanged, and no treasure at all. The total elapsed time of his career? A little over 2 years. It's odd seeing Blackbeard come to this undistinguished end. For piracy started out as far more illustrious, a feature of British imperial policy. As early as the 16th century, English ships carried letters of marque, entitling them to attack, loot, sink, or capture ships belonging to all enemy nations. France, Holland, Portugal, and Spain. Especially Spain, for such piracy was economic warfare. This was the period when the Caribbean was the Spanish lake, which was looked on by English sailors the way a lion looks on a herd of wildebeest. In effect, England licensed certain merchant captains to become lions. They called them privateers. It amounted to sanctioned plunder, a profitable if dangerous vocation. But one man's privateer is another man's pirate. How could you control a whole generation of well-trained privateers whose greatest weapon was their independence? The answer was, you couldn't. Said Admiral Nelson, "The conduct of all privateers is, as far as I have seen, so near piracy that I wonder how any civilized nation can allow them." And when privateers became pirates, they have allegiance to nothing save their own purses and bellies and tankards. Still, privateering worked, and in the beginning at least it gave the world its first great privateering hero, Sir Francis Drake. Sadly, he was also its last. Drake's career as a pirate was due to two things: global politics and Spanish gold. Finding the New World was a quest for gold, and from Columbus onward, the Spanish had mastered that quest. For nearly a century before Drake, they scarfed up Inca and Aztec precious metal to send back to Spain, but not before melting it down and reminting it into crudely fashioned coins of silver, pieces of 8, pesos, or gold coins called doubloons. Many men made their careers jumping Spanish treasure ships on the long voyage home. But only Drake tormented the Spanish so relentlessly that he earned the nickname El Draque, the Dragon.
Drake was an explosive cannonball of a man full of vanity, ambition, pride, intense religious zeal, vehemently Protestant, vehemently anti-Spain. Spain is the great Catholic champion of the Pope, and he hates the Pope like poison.
Drake was born near the coast in Devon in 1541. It was a time of building tension between Catholic Spain and Protestant England. Within his lifetime, the greatest invasion threat to England ever, the 1588 Spanish Armada, would be defeated, by Drake among others, on England's doorstep. But for Queen Elizabeth, she saw in the unknown Drake a certain strategic promise. In 1577, she commissioned his flotilla of 5 ships to wage economic terror against her enemy.
Drake knew that where the silver came from was on the other side of the continent. That Pacific seaboard is unguarded. It's the soft underbelly of the Spanish Empire. So if you can get there, then you can get to the treasure at source. So he has this idea: he will take a strong force of ships, he'll go round South America, he'll come up the other side and raid along that unguarded Pacific seaboard at will.
On December 13, 1577, Drake set off from the port of Plymouth on the south coast of England, heading into history. 2 years later, coming home from attacks on Spanish imperial shipping and blown off course, he would become the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe. The pirates' desire for gold drove them deeper and deeper into unknown worlds and uncharted seas. They pushed the envelope of navigation. Most of the men who opened up the South Seas began, like Sir Francis Drake, as pirates.
Drake would always insist that he had letters from the Queen authorizing him to do what he was doing. No one ever saw his instructions, and so we don't know whether he had or not, but it's really immaterial. You did whatever you could get away with. You haven't got any laws of the sea in those days.
Drake's flagship, the Golden Hind, was his only ship to complete the voyage. 100 feet long and 18 wide, it was a floating city, though a cramped one.
So here she is. She's a small ship, crammed with 184 plus men. But within this small space, social distinctions are going to be very clearly kept. And so Drake lives aft there in his own great cabin, because he is the representative of the Queen. This is the crew's quarters. They don't go up there. They don't go up to the poop deck. Each man with his own chest lashed down into his favourite place, and that's where he will live, that's where he will sleep. In rough weather, he will move down below to the gun deck and sleep between the guns. But that's the conditions that the serfs live under, and it's totally different from the conditions that the gentleman and the captain live under. Ships were built on various levels for social reasons, to distinguish between the lower orders and the upper orders, and also for the very practical business that this was a fighting ship. And so from this upper level, men would be able to leap onto the decks of a ship that was being grappled, and from the lower level, the guns would fire away into the belly of the other ship.
Trying to uncover the past using only the implements and conditions available then is called experimental archaeology. 20 years ago, a reproduced Golden Hind set sail again. The captain of the new Golden Hind was Adrian Small.
We found that he was a much better sea dog than we were. He did things with his ship that we found are very, very difficult to do. They wouldn't attempt to do long passages into the eye of the wind or against the wind like a modern yacht. They let the ship go off before the wind and just sail to another part of the ocean where they might get more favourable winds.
But to reach the Pacific, there is one fearsome impediment that every ship must endure. At the tip of South America, the Straits of Magellan.
The passage through Magellan Strait would be today considered quite a feat in any sailing vessel, let alone a period galleon. That is a tremendous feat to sail, and in the centuries that followed, sailing ships avoided going through the Strait of Magellan and preferred to go around Cape Horn.
It takes 6 weeks, but Drake battles his way through the straits and emerges into the relative calm of the Pacific. No English ship has done this before. Conquering the straits gives him the one feature sought by every pirate since Drake: sudden and overwhelming surprise. For weeks, he ravages the South American coast, falling upon one unsuspecting ship and town after another. And then, on March the 1st, 1579, Drake comes upon the fattest of Spanish treasure ships, the Cacafuego.
Drake has heard about this ship, the Nuestra Señora de la Ascensión, which is working its way up to Panama, loaded with treasure from the silver mines. She's also famed to be a very powerful ship. That's why she's nicknamed the Cacafuego, literally the ship fire.
Cacafuego is a major warship and twice the size of the Golden Hind. Ordinarily, such an attack would be considered suicidal. And so here Drake uses the second trick in every pirate's kit: deceit.
What Drake does is he throws out a number of loaded wine jars full of water to slow him down, crams on full canvas, and starts moving towards the Cacafuego. And so the Cacafuego, this unknown vessel, looks like a labouring merchantman. She's obviously travelling under full sail, but she's not making very good speed. So, in order to find out who she is, the Cacafuego turns round, comes back towards Drake, and comes alongside. And the captain of the Cacafuego hails this other ship. Who is she? What does she want? Drake's answer is surrender. Why should I surrender? Laughs the captain of the Cacafuego. And for answer, Drake has one of his culverin fire which carries away the mizzenmast of the Cacafuego. And while the captain is still wondering what the hell is going on, up from the decks of the Golden Hind appear all these armed men ready to swarm aboard, which they very quickly do. They grapple and get aboard. Cacafuego has no time to fire its guns, no time to arm its men. He's finished. It's a very short, sharp, brilliant engagement, and Drake has taken a superior vessel.
It takes 6 days to reload the Cacafuego's treasure aboard the Golden Hind. And during all that time, the defeated and humiliated Spanish captain is treated to a great feast in Drake's cabin.
Drake also had an inferiority complex. He's a man on the make, he's a man determined to work his way up and to show that he is just as great as the great nobleman of the realm. And so he is going to surround himself with all the trappings of wealth and splendor. And so when he has the captain of the Cacafuego and his officers on board, he entertains them here in the great cabin. Musicians play in the background, and it's just as though he were a great nobleman holding court in the household of Queen Elizabeth.
Worth about $20 million today, the Cacafuegos is among the richest prizes ever taken by pirating.
On that treasure ship were 1,300 bars of silver and 14 chests of coin, plus an unspecified amount of private treasure belonging to various merchants. It was a huge amount of money. This was his major haul of the whole trip. To give you some idea, when he got back to England, he was able to pay the backers of the expedition 4,700% return on their investment and provide the Queen with money which was the equivalent of a year's government expenditure. A lot of money.
Drake himself kept £10,000 and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1581. He would die in 1596, the victim of disease on another privateering venture in the Caribbean. His career set a very high standard for every pirate that would follow him down the ages, a standard that would never be achieved again. Prompted by Drake's success, hundreds of would-be privateers take up the trade, but a dearth of target ships renders their valor increasingly desperate. In time, they descend to the level of bloodthirsty opportunists, terrorists really, who constantly operate under false flags, who seldom blink at betrayal and treachery, and who routinely kill to eradicate witnesses. For all that, they seldom hit it big. The Spanish learned to hoard their treasure in highly defended ports along the Caribbean, the coast known as the Spanish Main. Even more depressing, they bring their gold home in great treasure fleets, a defensive tactic that is never cracked by pirates or privateers.
People in England tried to make money out of privateering, but it's very difficult when you're 6 months sailing distance. They hoped they'd one day find a richly laden galleon floating towards them totally undefended, or a golden city in the jungle, but more often they actually found a small sloop trading hides or cocoa.
These were desperate times on sea and land, and many were driven to theft. In London, every coach coming into the city from the south in 1 week was robbed. If robbery was that common in England, imagine how easy it must have seemed in the Caribbean. In any case, in the post-Drake world, the warm and protective Carib Sea had become a vast pirate's den. Most pirates were sailors who would jump ship or indentured servants who would run away from their contracts on sugar plantations. That is, they were felons, many facing capital punishment. Those first runaways gave us the term buccaneer, land-based raiders. Their name is derived from boucan, the native word for the rack on which meat was smoked. Sleeping rough in the jungles, they originally made their way selling cured pork to passing Spanish mariners. It was a way of life quickly discarded once they noticed how easy it would be to plunder those same ships. They became buccaneers. In the beginning, the island of Hispaniola was a major buccaneer base. To the Spanish, they were a nuisance that needed dealing with.
The buccaneers were chased off Hispaniola by the Spanish, and they became pirates, and they were joined by an assorted bunch of English and Dutch soldiers and seamen and deserters, and together formed this terrifying bunch of young men. They were mostly in their 20s or 30s.
Oddly, it was their apprenticeship in hunting the fast and elusive wild boar that made the buccaneers good pirates. Hunting the stationary helmsman was hardly sport.
The weapon that I'm handling is called a fusil boucanier, a buccaneer's musket, from the French. This one dates from about 1650 or 1660. Its distinguishing characteristic is the huge length of its barrel. As you see, this one is nearly 6 feet long. With such a weapon, a skilled marksman could bring down a wild pig on the run, or he could pick the helmsman off of an enemy's deck. The buccaneers were good shots. They were very good shots. They were masters in the use of small arms, the first who gave it any attention.
Surprise, deceit, and a dead hand at the wheel. Basic ingredients for crippling a ship.
On this occasion, the pirates used canoes and paddled straight up to the windward side of the ship. Using long-barreled muskets, they shot the helmsman and the crew working the sails, causing the ship to fall away from the wind with her sails flapping. Firing continuously, they rowed up under the stern and with further shots cut through the main sheet, so the ship was totally disabled.
Hiding in the jungles and making their way scavenging off the land, the buccaneers were inventing guerrilla warfare. They used whatever they had to hand, only recycled and retooled for aggression and violence.
Armed to the teeth, excessively armed, he's got 2 flintlock pistols, he's got 2 cutlasses, and probably tucked away in a pocket somewhere, he's got a couple of hand grenades to throw on deck to cause maximum terror. And he's got here a jacket covered with pitch or tar, which gives some sort of protection from sword wounds, and you can see if you sort of saw into that, it provides some sort of protection. How does it actually feel in all that gear?
Extremely uncomfortable, hot and heavy.
They were battle-hardened terrorists, really. They weren't nice people. They were quite capable of using their weapons. They were extremely accurate shots. They would have been good at sword play. They would have been effective with cutlasses. They were a nasty and terrifying lot of people.
The pistol was the boarding firearm of the pirate, good for one shot. Bang, and then, because it was a big heavy thing, you threw it at the enemy. As soon as your enemy is about 10 feet away from you, that was the preferred distance. But at that range, they were deadly effective. Well, let's see how seriously we've inconvenienced our enemy here. It's gone right in there, and it's come out right there. The problem, of course, was that it would carry a piece of your shirt, your coat, in with it, and although they might be able to dig the ball out, they would never get the fragments of garment, with the result that the wound would certainly fester. You'd probably die of gangrene if the bullet didn't kill you outright.
There was no anaesthetic, there was no antiseptics. And from bitter experience, they knew that unless the limb was amputated, it would usually mortify, as they would call it, go gangrenous, get infected. And probably the only effective way of dealing with a severe injury of the limb was to amputate it. Poor seaman's brought down, let's say with a compound fracture of his leg from a cannonball. We'd put him on the operating table. His mates would put a bit of leather between his teeth to stop him screaming too much. Another man to hold up the leg. Now I've got to try and stop the bleeding as much as possible. If I had anybody skilled, if I had a surgeon's mate, I'd get him to press on the femoral artery. That would reduce the bleeding considerably. Probably I wouldn't have anybody as skilled as that, so I'd put a tourniquet round the thigh to stop the bleeding. Very painful, but still effective. And then I'd have to fashion the skin flaps and cut through the muscle so that the skin flaps would flap back over the stump of the bone, like so. Having done that, I would make my skin incision using my amputation knife, as long and as sharp as I can get. Cut through the skin flaps, cut through the muscle, discard my knife, pick up my saw, saw through the tibia and fibula, the two bones of below the knee. Whole thing should have taken 30 to 60 seconds, if I'm skillful. Pick up the main arteries with forceps, pull them down, tie them off with a piece of silk or a piece of thread. Put a dressing on, take off the tourniquet, end the procedure. Give the patient a couple of opium tablets, plus or minus a good slug of rum. Take him off the table.
Still, even the one-legged ones were lucky. Most amputees died of gangrene within a few days. A pirate boarding party meant all sorts of lethal shrapnel slicing through the air. One of the most dangerous weapons was also one of the smallest.
The grenade, a favorite weapon of the pirates. Spherical cast iron ball, about 5 inches around, loaded with 5 ounces of gunpowder. Fused with a wooden fuse, hollow with a compound in it, driven home, and sealed with wax so that no stray spark could get into it. When it was lit, it took about 6 seconds to go off, and you could throw it about 90 feet. The blunderbuss, a favorite shipboard weapon. We're told it was Blackbeard's favorite. It was loaded with a handful of pistol balls, and when it was fired, it would create absolute devastation over a broad area of decks. It had to be fired like this, from this position, so that when it recoiled, and its recoil was massive, it would be cushioned that way. If you made the mistake of putting it to your shoulder, it would break your shoulder. But all the firearms were one-shot weapons, then they had to be reloaded. The backbone of any boarding action was the cutlass, a thrusting weapon or a cutting weapon, used over and over. It was short so that you didn't get the blade hung up in the rigging if you were handling it on deck, and also you could swing it in a tight-packed group of men.
Pirates constantly faced better armed and outfitted foes. Strangely, however, they often quailed in the face of, what was it? Possibly the pirates' desperate valor? This meant the pirates were continuously capturing new and better equipment and improving their arsenal. And since they usually stole boats as well as loot, it can be said truly they got their money for nothing and their ships for free.
Pirates, on the whole, preferred small, fast ships. I mean, I think one of the problems with the movies is in the past they've always shown these vast pirate galleons. In fact, the records show that the pirates preferred small brigs and ideally what were called sloops, which we would call today a gaff cutter, which was a single-masted vessel in those days with a very big mainsail. And they were very fast and they were very big. They were often up to 70 foot in size and could carry a crew of 50 to 100 men.
Once they'd stolen a ship, the pirates would refit it, like drag racers, customizing it for speed. And the place to start was with the sails.
To make yourself go faster, you put up more canvas, but you would try and get sails that spill the wind quickly. If you can spin the wind quickly and get rid of it, then you get more wind in and you increase your airflow. And that's one way of, other than increasing your sail area, it's another way of increasing your speed.
A sail is like an airplane wing, really. Only a few modifications and you're overtaking a lumbering merchantman or skipping away from the Royal Navy. Speed was survival.
Because the ship would want to be in a good state itself, you know, for seaworthy and fast if possible. If they could find a faster one, I'm sure they'd use it.
But speed wasn't everything. You had to know where you were going.
People like to equate these early ships with space capsules. But you know, the space capsule has ground support, communications, and a full range of people assisting them, even though it's quite far away. When these ships left, they literally were entirely on their own.
Chip Reynolds has skippered replica galleons and knows firsthand the importance of navigation and the navigational uncertainties faced by early mariners.
This instrument, the crossstaff, was essential to tracking the position of latitude. It would be used by sighting celestial objects, the sun, stars.
To sail the Atlantic safely, mariners would take sightings of the elevation of the sun each day, allowing them to follow a single line of latitude all the way across. These waters were uncharted, and so after weeks, sometimes months of sailing, they faced another dragon, the shoals and reefs that protect the shore.
The lead line was really one of the most critical pieces of navigational equipment to transatlantic crossings. The mate or another crew member would be standing on the channel and cast the lead into the bottom. Then they can read the depth right off the line.
Even in calm seas and on sandy bottoms, a ship will soon break up. In wild seas, it can break up in minutes.
If they ended up on a sandbank or if they ended up coming ashore unexpectedly, their vessel was ruined, they were marooned and probably dead.
Once they had a fast ship, most 17th century pirates sooner or later made their way to British Port Royal, Jamaica, the cosmic center for all manner of buccaneers, privateers, and pirates. Anyone said to be, in their own words, living on account. They came to Port Royal because the British knew that for Spain, piracy was not just some swashbuckling inconvenience. It struck at the very idea of a colony, its umbilical cord. At heart, what made colonies work was maritime commerce. If a colony was to be any good at all, it had to be good for the mother country, and that meant a steady stream of goods and profits crossing the Atlantic. Not for nothing was British Jamaica smack in the middle of the Spanish Lake. Port Royal officials were said to be easy touches for letters of marque, and almost any reprobate with a stolen ship could get one. Anything bad for Spain was good for England.
Privateering was an ideal startup trade for a new colony. It required very little in the way of capital investment, and it offered very quick returns. Though the islanders gained security and the buccaneers gained access to what was the best port and the best market for prize goods in the Caribbean.
What happens is really quite amazing. Here we are sitting at the end of a peninsula that surrounds perhaps one of the seventh largest natural harbor in the world, which has no water, has no other amenities to support life, and yet still becomes the launching port for maritime terrorism, which is really what the buccaneers were. They were licensed terrorists. Port Royal by 1692 is a town of some 8,000 persons, certainly much larger than New York even became 20 years later, and a crossroads of the Asian, African, and European continents, a melting pot, a cosmopolitan city.
Port Royal became a year-round pirate carnival. They swarmed here by the thousands, captains looking for crews, crews looking for ships. A Port Royal rendezvous was at heart a great boozy blowout. A priest newly come from England saw the town as essentially irredeemable.
Since the majority of the population consists of pirates, cutthroats, whores, and some of the vilest persons in the whole world, I felt my presence there was of no permanent use.
Turning his back on the town, he left Port Royal to its own devices. The pirate lifestyle was undeniably attractive. But that very freedom from responsibility, from possessions, complicates pirate history. Pirates were not good nesters, and they mostly drank up their profits. So pirate artifacts are hard to come by. But not at Port Royal. Here, nearly everything was touched by a pirate.
Well, these are wine bottles, or onion bottles as they are called. The late 17th century, you find wine bottles all over the place in vast quantities. See, a lot of the wine was weak stuff, and they'd sooner drink the wine than drink the bad water. But imagine it being more healthy to drink the wine and the water. Of course, if you overdid it, that's another thing. Now we have some pewter tankards here. It's patterned off the work of a silversmith. It's a poor man's silver. And the thumb piece here on the lid is interesting. It's a Bacchus head, god of drink, and a very elaborate handle. Very nice piece. Probably French. After the drinking comes the cure for the hangovers, the pharmaceutical bottles. This is a little collection here of drug bottles. And also they have to go with these things, the syringes, you see. And this is a nice big one. Don't ask me what the medicine was that went to it. They had all sorts of strange things that they took. Clay pipes, which we find by the thousands. Everybody smoked in those days. See, a pipe was very cheap. You go into a tavern, they give you a pipe bowl. You drop the pipe, you'll be a very delicate thing. I mean, you'll be talking and flourishing, brandishing a hand, snap goes the stem, you get another pipe. This one has been smoked. You can see where the tobacco has burnt it. You can easily match up the maker's names with the initials on the pipe. L.E. Llewellyn Evans. It's a Welsh pipe maker.
The Welsh connection is strong. For Port Royal's foremost pirate was a Welshman who arrived here at the very beginning, 1655, when the English captured Jamaica from Spain. Just 19 years old, he arrives at a time when there's a need for young privateers to harry the Spanish. He is given a boat and set loose. He is called Henry Morgan.
Henry Morgan was, in a way, the man that the buccaneers were all waiting for. One of his uncles was a major general. The other was a lieutenant colonel who actually became lieutenant governor of Jamaica. So he knew about military tactics. It was in his blood, as it were.
Starting with a single tiny vessel carrying letters of marque against Spain, Captain Morgan joined numerous raids against Spanish Cuba and Central America. Though militarily successful, the raids were far less profitable than buccaneers had come to expect.
They usually concentrated on attacking towns which lay outside the main treasure routes, which were much less well defended. Some towns had been plundered 3, 4, 5, 6 times in the 1660s, and clearly these people were running into diminishing returns.
After a decade as a coastal raider, Morgan had designs on a prestige target, Panama City, the treasury of Spain's Pacific coast. The Spanish considered Panama safe because to get there they knew raiders would have to round the tip of the continent. They were wrong.
Panama was chosen for two reasons. The buccaneers were pretty sure they'd find masses of gold and silver there. And the second thing was it had a sort of symbolic reason. It was the great Spanish city in the center of America, and if they could capture it and better still burn it to the ground, it would wipe out Spanish influence for a time and be very shaming for the Spanish.
For Spain, the Caribbean had become tiresome, what with all those English privateers about. But the Pacific coast, that was protected by 80 miles of dank and tangled jungle. Only a madman would attempt that. And so the Welsh madman, Morgan, puts together a flotilla of 38 ships, 2,000 men, the meanest and largest soldier of fortune outing ever. His plan is bold, and the odds are stacked against him. They would overwhelm the Spanish fort on the Atlantic side of the isthmus. From there, they would row in small boats up the Chagres River, cross the remaining jungle on foot, and surprise the Pacific Spaniards from behind. The Dutch surgeon and buccaneer Alexandre Esquemeling was there.
As we went further up the river, we heard Indians howling in the distance and crying, "Ha perros, a la selva! Go to the jungle, ye dogs!" None of us knew what terrors lay ahead.
It sounds a good plan, but it isn't. The river gets too shallow too fast. Soon they are slogging through mud and hacking through the undergrowth.
I think it's impossible for us really to understand, the conditions they were facing. There were clouds of mosquitoes biting them all the time, all sorts of nasty creatures. There would be leeches clinging onto their feet as they went through the water.
Not only that, stragglers are constantly being picked off by the Indians. Settlers abandoned their plantations, stripping them of provisions and livestock, even poisoning their wells. The invaders are facing starvation. Now Morgan has another idea. They would eat their own gloves, belts, and shoes. They slice the leather into strips, beating it till it is wafer thin. Then they boil it. The Dutchman Esquemeling is appalled.
Some persons who were never out of their mother's kitchens may ask how these pirates could swallow and digest these pieces of leather. To them, I say, if they ever experience such famine as the buccaneers did, they would certainly do the same thing.
At the end of their 9-day trek, Morgan's bold plan had consumed 800 lives, over a third of his original force. Exhausted, shaken, and depressed, Morgan's men stagger out of the thickets and blink in the rude sunlight. Before them, the great Panama. But the Spanish are waiting, 2,000 strong. Luckily for Morgan, only 300 of them are soldiers. The rest are farmers, civilians, and servants selected to fill out the ranks. For Morgan's part, he still has 4 squadrons of professional killers. Worse, he has a group of French marksmen who are deadly at long range.
Morgan sends one of his squadrons to capture a hill which he sees overlooks the battlefield, and the Spanish think that he's actually retreating, and broke ranks and started to attack in total chaos.
The Battle of Panama is over. But the Spanish are determined that nothing of value be left. Most of the treasure is carted off or hidden. Adopting a scorched earth policy, they even lay waste to most of their own city. Panicking, Morgan's army sees its dreams of avarice going up in smoke. For 4 weeks, Morgan's men torture their captives, trying to uncover as much gold as possible. But they miss the biggest prize. Just ahead of the invaders, a monk hides the cathedral's massive golden altar under a coat of whitewash. Still wet, the altar is overlooked.
They came away with 175 mules loaded with silver ingots and gold, something like £2 million, $3 million, which divided between over 1,000 men didn't come to very much. And there was a lot of aggravation at the end of it that Morgan had cheated them. They felt that the men didn't get what they deserved.
History is silent on just how much booty Morgan pocketed for himself. Is there ever honor among thieves? But this cache of silver from the Port Royal Church is rumored to descend from Morgan's audacious Panama raid. Morgan leaves Chagres for Jamaica in March 1671. He returns to a changed world, a world that has no place for audacious raids and patriotic violence. England was at peace with Spain. To mollify her, Morgan was arrested and taken to London for trial. But popular opinion preceded him. He found himself a hero. He was knighted and sent back to Port Royal as the new Lieutenant Governor, Sir Henry Morgan. Trouble was, Morgan was now expected to suppress his old comrades, the men who made his career on the Spanish Main.
He was a great buccaneer leader, but he was absolutely not a great bureaucrat. And of course he was expected to attend council meetings, and he didn't. And he just took to drink and having a good time with his mates in the local taverns. It's really sad. His last few years, he was very ill. He was drinking far too much and just died peacefully on his ranch. His doctor said he died of drink and staying up too late. He was one of the few buccaneers to come to a relatively peaceful end.
Morgan died on August the 25th, 1688, after 13 years on the right side of the law. It killed him, apparently. His funeral featured a 22-gun salute from all the ships in Port Royal Harbour. That fusillade was a mere taste of what the wickedest city on earth would face just 4 years later, on June 7th, 1692. Built on a sandy spit of land, it was rocked by an earthquake and tidal wave and slid into the sea. A watery grave is all that remains of the pirate capital and the 2,000 who perished with her. As Port Royal slipped under the waves, the golden age of piracy was reaching its peak. It's no wonder sea traders were called merchant venturers. You never knew for sure, what with storms, unreliable charts, or pirates, that your ship would ever come in.
Pirates of the period 1680 to 1725 were at war with every country on the face of the earth. We estimate that there were between 5,000 and 10,000 individuals involved in piracy one way or another, under the command of 70 different captains.
With no home port, pirates began to range far and wide. From the 1690s onward, no corner of the globe, no trade route was totally guaranteed. Now it was the trade routes from Africa, loaded with ivory and dazzling gems, that caught the pirate imagination. Or the fragrant casks of spices and silks from India and Persia and the Moluccas. That was the stuff of dreams. It was a good time to be a pirate. World trade was expanding into exotic markets. But for most of the 17th and 18th centuries, the great world navies, British, Spanish, Dutch, and French, were at each other's throats. They'd no time to protect their merchant vessels, and no time for pirates. That's when the old idea of privateering was dusted off. This time not as a weapon against shipping, but against pirates. And the first man to try this was called William Kidd. A Scotsman living in New York, he serves as a royalist privateer with distinction and marries well. He uses these contacts to secure a commission to rove the East Indies, relieve pirate ships of their booty, and return the loot to America for the colonial government.
Next.
He'd need seasoned veterans, men who aren't squeamish or finicky. He finds them in the quayside taverns and ordinaries of New York. He finds his old privateering crew, in fact.
Gunner's mate.
I'm not sure that pirate hunting was all that they had in mind. He recruits crewmen. Among them are men that he knows to be pirates. Some of those men were sailors who had run away with his own ship 10 years earlier. Would he have hired them if he had honest intentions in mind?
My name is William Kidd. When I sailed, my name is William Kidd. When I sailed.
On September 6th, 1696, Kidd set sail. His is a motley crew, 152 dangerous men en route eastward to do the king's work. This is no patient and forgiving crew, and conditions aboard Kidd's ship Adventure Galley are terrible. Remember, this is a time that even when ships were good, they were bad, as the magisterial Dr. Johnson understood.
No man will be a sailor who has contrivance enough to get himself into a jail. For being in a ship is being in jail with the chance of being drowned. A man in jail has more room, better food, and commonly better company.
Now, of course, here we have the forecastle.
And the ship's galley.
The irony, of course, is that it was only in pleasant conditions, with sunshine and nice, easy-going situations, that you would actually have hot food. Something like this, where you really needed the hot food, as you can see, it would be impossible to maintain the fire, and you're living off of cold gruel and a hunk of bread.
Yeah. The bread would usually be infested with either weevils or maggots, and it's my understanding that Royal Navy men preferred it when it was infested with maggots, on account of the weevils left a bitter aftertaste. Kids, men, as an extra bit of a treat, would have a piece of cheese as part of their ration, but even that had its own special horrors, because there was a long, thin, and nasty worm that dwelt in the bowels of the cheese that was particularly wretched and horrendous and vile tasting.
But this crew especially, all work and no prey, got old way too soon. They began to murmur and complain. When one is a bit too vocal, Kid flies into a rage. Next day, the man is buried at sea.
He was a hard-driving, strong-willed captain. The kind of strong-willed captain that could easily cause a crew to mutiny. On the other hand, the kind of strong-willed captain who would often succeed.
Kid is now at